Hey, Katie. We have The Whispering Statue. We are on Chapter 16, Unwelcome Command. Your clue is wonderful, said Bess. But how can you use it? The words in that torn letter don't make any sense to me. George said, Why don't we drive back to the yacht club? You can study it there, Nancy. The young detective did not want to leave yet. Let's search for the rest of the letter, she said. The girls turned over all the pieces of statuary, but found nothing. The hedge and every bit of the ground around the barn were scrutinized carefully. No other clues were found. Finally, Nancy agreed to leave. The girls climbed into Dick's car and started for Waterford. After they had been driving about 15 minutes, George said, Nancy, have you figured anything out about the torn note? Yes, I have one hunch. Bess, please look in the glove compartment and see if there's a map of this area. As Bess was rummaging through a stack of maps, she asked, What's on your mind? Nancy said she believed the pit in the note stood for a town, and I have a hunch it's one not far from here. How'd you arrive at that conclusion? George asked. First of all, I'm sure I recognize the handwriting on that note. It's definitely Willis Basswood's. Really? Bess said in amazement. Then he knows about the whispering statue and where it is? Exactly, Nancy replied. He probably sold it secretly to someone who doesn't live far away, so it wouldn't be seen on the road. I believe that person is in Pit something. Bess, did you find the map? A local map was on the bottom of the pile. Bess pulled out the folded sheet and opened it. Pit. Oh, here's one. Pittville. Nancy, you're a genius. Don't praise me yet. I may be on the wrong track. Is there another town beginning with Pitt? Bess's forefinger was moving over the map. Presently she cried out, Here's a town with the name Pittman. Any more pits? George asked. Just don't find one that says Pitfall. So that would be something unfortunate. Nancy and Bess smiled, and Bess remarked, That's pretty corny. Nancy was glad that no more towns beginning with P-I-T were in the vicinity. Tomorrow we'll go to Pittville, and then to Pittman. In what? Bess asked. Then she added hopefully, Maybe Dick will lend us his car again. He's a great guy. George remarked, If Mr. Basswood stole the statue, it probably was taken directly to Marco DeKeer's barn. After the reproduction was finished, their trucker friend delivered the original to the purchaser and brought the reproduction to the yacht club. Bess giggled. The mystery is practically solved. All you have to do is find out when and where and who did what and why. When the girls returned to their room at the yacht club, the telephone was ringing. The caller was Mr. Drew. He asked Nancy how she was progressing on the case. I hate to brag, Nancy replied, but we really have some fabulous clues. She related everything that she and her friends had learned since her last report. Mr. Drew was elated, but admitted he was worried for Nancy's safety. Don't work for that Mr. Basswood unless Bess and George come check on you every so often. All right, Dad. Anyway, I don't think I'll be there much longer. Mr. Basswood says Mr. Atkin is leaving the hospital very soon and will be back to work. By the way, Dad, where are you calling from? Washington, D.C. I'm still working on my case here. He chuckled. You'll probably get home before I do and solve this whole mystery yourself. I hope you're right, Nancy said, laughing, and I'm glad that so far no one has seen through my disguise. Mr. Drew said goodbye, and Nancy turned to talk to Bess and George. They had changed their clothes and were ready to go downstairs. I'll meet you as soon as I take off these dusty clothes and put on fresh ones. Oh, I guess my wig needs good brushing, too. 15 minutes later, she joined Bess and George in the lobby of the club. They were talking with Dick. We may borrow Dick's car tomorrow, Bess announced. Dick spoke up. I won't need it. If I have to go into town, I'll use the truck. I certainly appreciate the offer, Dick, said Nancy. She grinned at him. You're always coming to our rescue. We ought to take time out to do something for you. Debbie Lynbrook, you've said just exactly the right thing. You can do something for me right now." "What's that?" Nancy asked. Dick explained that he had reserved one of the ping-pong tables in the recreation room, hoping the girls would join him in a doubles match. George beamed. "That's a groovy way of paying a debt." The four young people went downstairs. After a toss of paddles, the partners turned out to be Dick and George against Nancy and Bess. At the end of 2 games, the score stood 1-1. Dick complimented all the girls on their playing. "You're champs," he said. Bess called to him, "You're terrific yourself, but Debbie and I are going to win this game." There were long volleys and some breathtaking net shots, but in the end, Nancy and Bess won the game. "We told you so," Bess gloated. But the next game went to Dick and George. After half an hour of hard, fast playing, the score stood even, but in the final game, Dick and George scored the 21st point and were declared the victors. Bess flopped into a chair. "I'm absolutely pooped," she'd said. Dick looked at her. "Would a sundae made with fudge sauce revive you? I hear that's one of your favorite dishes." "It sure would," Bess replied. "It's a beautiful idea. Let's go." The four went into the club snack shop. Over the loudspeaker came the announcement, "Miss Debbie Lynbrook is wanted on the phone." Nancy excused herself and went to the telephone on the wall of the shop. "This is Mr. Basswood," the caller said. "Miss Lynbrook, I want you here at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." Nancy hesitated. If she worked all day, she would not be able to drive to Pittville and Pittman to continue her sleuthing, and she was determined not to give that up. "Did you hear me?" Mr. Basswood asked impatiently. "Yes," Nancy replied. "I'll be there at 9, but I'll have to leave at 2:30. Mr. Basswood's voice was icy as he said, "All right, but I'll expect you to forgo your lunch hour. Goodbye." As Nancy returned to her friends, she frowned a little and said to herself, "What an old grouch he is." A little later, Dick said he must leave. The girls continued to talk. Nancy told the cousins about her phone call from Mr. Basswood. "But I'll be able to leave at 2:30. Suppose we drive directly to Pittville then?" "It's only about 20 miles from here," Bess said. When the girls were ready to go upstairs, Nancy said, "You don't mind if I stay down here a little while? I'd like to stroll around outside and do some thinking." "We don't mind," Bess assured her, "but don't be late. Mr. Basswood would not like it if his star salesman came to work hollow-eyed and weary." As Nancy walked toward the bay side of the club, she found herself heading toward the statue. A stiff breeze was blowing, and she was forced to hold on to her wig. As she neared the marble figure, Nancy suddenly stopped. "The statue is whispering," she told herself. No one was around. Deep, garbled words seemed to be issuing from the statue's mouth. "There must be a reasonable explanation for this," Nancy thought, "but it's weird and eerie just the same." She moved back a little distance to gaze at the marble lady. At the same instant, 2 dark shadows crossed in front of the statue. A man's harsh voice whispered, "Her friends are here, but where's Nancy Drew?" Another hard voice replied, "She must be around here. We'll find her." Nancy's heart was thumping. She was well hidden in the shadow of the yacht club. Should she stay there or run into the clubhouse? That might be a giveaway, she decided, and stayed where she was. Just then the first voice said, "Here comes somebody. We'd better scram." The shadowy figures disappeared, and Nancy could hear running footsteps. Although she had not been able to identify the men, the young sleuth knew from their voices that they were 2 of the thugs who had tried to kidnap her and Bess and George at the deserted mansion on the beach. She wondered if her enemies had discovered she was wearing a disguise. Relieved that the men had not seen her, Nancy walked quickly back to the clubhouse. She went to her room at once and told George and Bess what had happened. "Thank goodness you're safe," said Bess. "From now on, we're never going to leave you alone. And you say the statue whispered? It's uncanny." "What did it say?" George asked. "The lady only mumbled," Nancy replied. "I couldn't figure out anything." The following morning, the three girls went to the art shop together. It had been cleared and set in order. While Nancy waited on customers, Bess and George roamed through the large display room. Once the owner came from his office and glared at them, but said nothing. Just before 12 o'clock, Nancy made a big sale. She carried the painting to Mr. Basswood's office and knocked. The door swung open. Mr. Basswood did not take the painting as he usually did. Instead, he yanked Nancy inside and shoved her into a chair. He locked the door. Angrily, he said, "Stay there, young lady. Now tell me, what were you doing at Mr. DeKeer's studio, and why did you run off?" Uh-oh. Found out. I'll have to see what happened.